Hey folks, we're going to go to YouTube for a question/comment. I'm at a crossroads of allowing AI in my workflow since I am close to a beginner to building my own programs. Went through a computer science degree program that was super math and theory heavy. This is pretty common. So I'm not afraid of understanding the code AI could assist with writing, but I honestly have such few works. I think I should be avoiding it entirely until I have a few more projects under my name. So, how many more projects? Should I continue to not use AI since I'm very fresh with building 1,000-line coding projects? Or am I wasting my time and use all the tools at my disposal to get more things up to help me get a job soon? It's been 2 months out of graduation. I'm mostly a Java guy right now, by the way. So, big thanks to this person for writing in. It's on YouTube. It's The Shaking Duck. These are very interesting usernames, so let's discuss that. Let me start getting on the road here, though. And if you want your questions answered, leave them in the comments. Otherwise, if you want to write in anonymously, you can look for Dev Leader on social media. That's also my main YouTube channel. I literally can't press this button enough to stop this damn beeping. And yeah, if you write in, then I'll keep you anonymous. Of course, if you write a comment, your username is public, so I can't help you with that. Okay, but I think this is a good topic of conversation because I think a lot of people are kind of, I don't know, getting mixed messages, or maybe it's not even mixed. Maybe it's very much just like, oh no, you're bad. You're a beginner, you're using AI, you're bad. I'm gonna throw up if I hear that beep one more time. Please stop beeping. You can only press the disable button so many times, which is dumb because it's literally in the disabled mode. It's lit up saying that it's off and it will still beep. So yeah, people I think are getting kind of told like, hey, if you're using AI, it's automatically like for the wrong reason if you're a beginner. And I'm going to share my perspective on this, I guess. And if you're new to the channel, then my goal is to kind of share my perspective, my experiences as a software engineering manager for the past almost 13 years. And I think this is one where I'm going to try my best to also call out bias and share what could be different perspectives. I think that it's important we try to do that when discussing anything. Obviously, you know, the easy thing to do is just say, here's my opinion and like deal with it. But I don't know. I feel like we don't learn and grow as much if we're not trying to do a little bit more than that, right? So I like to try and challenge myself a little bit as I go through these exercises because that way I get something out of it too. So when we talk about using AI tools and building projects and stuff, I think there's a couple of different things going on, right? And I think it's important to try and figure out what you're actually trying to accomplish. So when we have people, let's say this is more common for beginners, although I would say it's not, personally, I don't think it's exclusive to beginners, but especially if you're seeking a job, you know, one of the things you keep hearing is, hey, you got to be building projects on the side. That's really going to help give you some extra ammunition for your resume, and you can have a portfolio and stuff. I think these are all good things. And when we talk about this, it's like, as a beginner or at any level, right? Are you building projects because you are trying to showcase something on a resume? And what are you trying to showcase with that project? Because I think these are important questions to ask. Or are you just trying to put together projects purely so that you can learn and practice? Now, these don't have to be mutually exclusive by any means, because I think that it's great to be able to put together a project, put it on a resume, and say, this was for learning purposes. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think that you just want to go into this kind of stuff understanding what your goal is. Okay, so if your goal was like, I'm just going to give you some very different examples. If your goal was like, I want to put together an app as fast as I can, trying to get an MVP together, trying to see if I can onboard users, like I just want to, you know, kind of get something working as fast as possible, then I would say, especially if you're a beginner, like leveraging AI to go cobble together whatever you can, that would work well. I'm not saying, when I say well, I'm not saying that's going to build a good system, but would it let you put together things faster? The answer is probably yes. Okay, but it's like important to understand what the goal is, because if I said, now, if your goal was to go learn about how things work, and then I gave you the same advice, just get AI to spit out whatever code you can, copy paste it, get it compiling, and you're on with it. Like, I don't think that's the best way to learn. So, like, I think you need to step back and understand what the goal is. Because I think this is why you hear so much conflicting opinion and perspective on this stuff. It's because people will go into these conversations, and if you haven't aligned about what the goal is in the conversation, then it's like, yeah, of course you could have completely different takes on this stuff. So, for this person, right, if your goal is like, hey, I want to get together stuff for my resume and demonstrate that I was able to learn about different technologies and stuff, then, like, number one, I think that's great, right? I definitely encourage that. And does that mean that you should or should not use AI? I think that you still have options here, right? If you're the kind of person who, when you're talking with an LLM, you're like, all that I'm doing is copying the code out of there, putting it into my IDE, fixing up, variable names and stuff, if that, and then I try to move on to the next thing. If you're like, I have a habit of doing that, then I might say, okay, well, if your goal is to try and learn more effectively, either maybe step back from the LLM a little bit, or change your approach, right? Like, challenge yourself to go ask the LLM questions every single time after it gives you some code, right? You have a tool in front of you that you can use in different ways. And I'm not saying it's easy, especially if you have a habit of doing it, but I'm just saying that you can use the tool in different ways. But you have to kind of understand how you work. And if you're like, it's almost too convenient, and like, I'm not gonna, like, thanks for the tip, Nick, but I'm not gonna do that, I'm just gonna keep taking the code, then I would say, yeah, like, maybe take a step back then. If it's too accessible for you and you find that it's hindering your learning, take a step back, right? Even that's probably easier said than done. But the point here is that you have to understand what your goal is. So if your goal is to learn and you have this tool in front of you that is very powerful, can you think of ways to leverage it to help learn? If so, then I would lean into that. Like, my personal take on this would be like, given how prevalent AI is and like the direction everything's going, or that I see it going, I feel like it's almost silly for me to be recommending people to not use AI, right? I have this, I don't even know if I want to draw this comparison. I'm going to do it, and I realize that this is probably going to set me up for different perspectives. So let's talk for a brief comparison. It's like screens with children. My wife and I don't have kids, and we've talked about when we have kids, there's this idea of like, when do you allow your children to have screens? And when we've talked about this at a high level, and like, she's not here to have the conversation with me and, kind of defend her perspective on it, but like, I'm of the mindset that like, what I don't want to do is say no screens until you're like 10 years old or something like that. And the reason I don't want to do that is because it's such an integral part of the direction that everything's going, that I think that you're actually going to be hindering them by disallowing them from leveraging it. But I think the difference is that, and what we both agree on, because I think she's of the mindset like, you should wait, and I'm like, I don't think so. But what I don't want to have happen is like, you put a screen in front of your kid just so that it's mindless activity. Like, if I put a screen in front of my kid, that screen is going to be loaded with things that are going to be learning tools, right? If you're going to be glued to a screen, you're going to be learning. So And I realize, easier said than done. I am not a parent. I'm not going through this, but that's my kind of philosophy, right? So the parallel I'm trying to draw here is like, I see that if kids are going to be technology enabled much earlier than I ever was, and I was enabled like with technology pretty early, right? Like when I was really little, not quite like a toddler, but when I was really little, I had access to the family computer. I was able to play, video games in DOS and not really know what I was doing. I had access to this stuff pretty early, relatively speaking, for that time. But like kids these days, they have digital devices like almost like as soon as their eyes can actually lock on to something. So I think that if everyone else around you is leveraging technology and tools in this way, and you are sort of preventing yourself from doing that, I think that, in my opinion, that's not the right answer. Instead, it's how do you understand how to leverage the technology effectively. So instead of avoidance, it's proper use and understanding. That's my personal take, right? But this is why I said, I think if you understand how you operate and you're like, I can't trust myself to do that, or I don't have the willpower, or whatever it happens to be, then maybe take a different approach. But that's why I don't recommend just avoidance, because I don't think that avoiding is like a sort of like a productive path forward. It's kind of avoiding the problem altogether, or the challenge altogether. So when people, especially juniors, are saying like, should I be using AI? I go back to what your goal is, right? So I would imagine that for most people that are junior, like your goal is actually learning, right? I know that it gets confusing because you're like, okay, I'm trying to get my resume together, trying to get my portfolio together. I keep hearing all this conflicting advice of like, can't have another calculator app or another to-do app on my portfolio because no one's ever going to hire me. It's not that you can't do that, right? The goal is all about standing out, right? That's what it's going to come down to. There's going to be tons of people submitting resumes and their applications. If they all look the same because a to-do app looks the same, then that's not going to stand out. It doesn't mean that it was a bad project or the wrong project. But if the goal is to be able to stand out, then that's probably not going to help much because it's a common one. Right? I just did a couple of resume review videos I recorded on my main channel, Dev Leader. At the time of recording this, they're not posted. Now, I had 2 resumes come in, and each one of them had projects listed on them that I thought was very coincidental and quite convenient for me to be able to talk through, because in many cases when people are submitting resumes, it's a lot of pretty front-end heavy web development. Nothing wrong with that, right? I'm not saying that's bad or whatever. I'm just saying that's the pattern I'm seeing a lot of. And not only that, with resumes submitted, kind of what I'm seeing a lot of patterns of online. There's a lot of people that get into software development very heavy into the front end for web development. Now, when you start seeing a bunch of resumes for people that are doing this, you're going to see some really repetitive things, right? So in the examples, it's like, okay, at least people have put together projects. Awesome. That's good news, right? That helps you stand out and differentiate especially from the people that don't, because I have already reviewed resumes where someone didn't have any extra side projects, right? My biggest feedback to them was, think about the people that you're competing against. If they have side projects and neither of you have work experience, the people with side projects are very likely going to stand out from a resume perspective. So these couple of resumes that came in, they had tools that they had built that were one was sort of like a file system navigator with file compression, and the other one was almost not quite like a file recovery tool, but something along the lines of that. And I was saying like, hey, look, like I used to work at a digital forensics company for 8 years. If we take the example of having a lot of really similar resumes come in, and then I have these two that have these projects where someone, just because they were interested, went and built something that is like, I don't know, adjacent to digital forensics, like that's pretty handy for standing out. Right? It's pretty handy for standing out for that particular job space. If we're comparing it to something like a calculator app or a to-do app, those don't really stand out. They could be great to list on a resume for learning, to saying like, hey, I built this, here's the frameworks I learned, here's why I did this, here's what I learned. Awesome. Right? That is valuable. It's just that compared to something else that might be more job specific or domain specific, it doesn't stand out as much. Okay, so if you're trying to get something on your resume that like is maybe something that's kind of eye-catching, I don't think there's anything wrong if you wanted to leverage AI to pull some stuff together and say, hey, look, I built this cool thing because it's unique and that might stand out. Nothing wrong with that. I do think that if you end up getting a job interview and then someone in the interview asks you about that and you can't explain any of it because you actually have no idea what's going on, you just kind of covered your eyes, copy-pasted, then like that's not going to be a good situation to be in. So I have this like recommendation and this has nothing to do specifically with AI tools, but if you're building software and you're putting code into a repository that's going to be something you're building and or shipping, you should probably understand what it's doing. Strong emphasis on the probably. It's likely pretty dangerous if you don't know what that code is doing. Right? This isn't unique to AI. It's just that AI makes it so much easier. Sorry, we had to go around someone that was going under the speed limit. You don't do that in the fast lane. And there's no 360 cam on right now because it's like kind of misting outside, and that would just be, 2 seconds into the video, just be water droplets on the camera. 360 cam is cool, but like completely useless as soon as it's a little bit damp outside. So, I mean, I'm kind of saying the same thing in a bunch of different, like the same way, slightly different ways maybe. But the reality is, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with using AI tools. I wouldn't discourage beginners from using it. I think that this is, a way that a lot of development is going. There's a lot of, support for AI tools for developers. Like, there's a lot of investment in that direction. I don't see that slowing down. Okay, so I just see it as a missed opportunity if you're not learning to use the tools effectively. So my recommendation is leverage the tools, but also understand how you're leveraging those tools. Try to understand what your goals are, and if those tools are compromising some of your goals. And it's like, it's okay to have an honest conversation with yourself, right? I'll be very transparent, okay? Like, just to give you an example of this, literally from last night. So, I've said this multiple times on videos. I am heavily using AI for my SQL queries. Okay, and so I'm building this product called Brand Ghost for social media scheduling. That's how I get all my social media content online. And I found a bug because we just had the time change, and we had done all of this work to accommodate that time change. Now, the scheduler that runs like I said, had a bug in it. And even though I had all of these tests to go check time zones and stuff like that and do time conversions, there's a funny scenario where, given the window of time that we're looking over, the sort of the windowing function I'm using doesn't account for the fact that if you shift your time zone, it might put you outside of that filtering window. But I'll kind of explain in a little bit more detail here. So I was like, okay, I have this function. The time stuff is completely mind-bending. And the reason that's the case for me is that historically, the way I've built literally everything to do with time, dates and times, is anchoring things to UTC, right? Just anchor stuff to UTC. It's like, that's absolute zero. Everything you can do offsets from there, you're good to go. It doesn't work with scheduling stuff. And without getting into too much detail, that problem ends up being that people schedule things. When you anchor it to UTC and then they go through a daylight savings time shift as the user, because their stuff was anchored to UTC, it now looks like it's an hour off. So the problem for me is that it screws up my brain when I'm trying to rationalize how this stuff works. I know what's going on, right? I know that there's an issue, but I'm like, my brain just stops working. And this is not because I have a SQL query that's too complicated. It's not because the code is too messy or something like that. It's literally, this is just a thing I've talked about, where when I have to map different, I call them like coordinate systems. It's more common for me with geometry. When I have to map different coordinate systems, in this case, it's time zone offsets, it really messes up my brain. It's like one of my biggest weaknesses in all of software development. It screws me up. So I acknowledge that I have this problem. I have a scenario, and I said, perfect. I have this SQL query, and I've been using ChatGPT very effectively to manipulate SQL queries and stuff, especially if I want to optimize them or get ideas on what to optimize. It's been super helpful. So I said, great, I'm going to give it this query. I'm going to explain exactly what the problem is, and it's going to help. Like, I've seen this work time and time again. So ChatGPT right away gives me this suggestion, and I'm going, that's not going to work because the way that I schedule stuff, like the example I gave, it was too broad of a time range. So I'm like, it's not going to work. I've kind of confused it that I'm able to actually look over an entire week to schedule, but really this thing runs on like a minute interval. So I'm like, it's not really fair. I spent an hour with ChatGPT trying to go back and forth. It kept giving me queries, and I'm like, this is garbage. It's like the same problem repeating. I was so frustrated, and I was like, this is absolutely backfiring. If I would have just stopped from the beginning, I could have sat there, looked at the query, and figured it out myself. So after an hour, that's exactly what I did. I stopped using ChatGPT. I looked at what was happening. And you know the conclusion I came to? It was the very first recommendation that ChatGPT actually gave me that I dismissed as being not going to work. It was right the very first time, and then I was the problem for the rest of it. So this is just an example of me like, going to use it, going too hard into it, being like, it's going to work, and then being completely screwed over by it. In the end, it was me screwing over myself. But, we have to acknowledge, like I probably should have stopped before wasting a full hour on that. Like, this isn't working. There was one point, like 15 minutes in, when I saw that it was repeating mistakes, I was like, maybe I should prompt it to tell it to consider a completely different solution, right? But instead of doing that, I should have just stepped back and said, maybe this isn't the right tool for the job. So I'm sharing this because it's like, I've been programming for over 20 years, and it's like I'm making mistakes like this because I have this tool in front of me. So I think that you just have to acknowledge like how you're using these tools, right? For me, it's not a learning thing. I'm not using ChatGPT in this case to sorry, that was people are real stupid sometimes when it comes to like on-ramps and stuff. So someone just like came up and then like sat in my blind spot, so I think they were trying to like give some space to like let me merge in, but I don't know, like just anyway, I think you have to understand your usage of these tools, understand where your weaknesses are, but then have this honest conversation with yourself, right? So next time, if I'm finding that like I have an LLM that's repeating the mistakes, maybe my first thing is like, I need to tell myself, you haven't prompted this effectively and you might not know a good way to prompt it effectively. That's why it's doing this. Take a step back. You go think about the problem a little bit more. You come up with a different perspective. And if you so decide to go back to the LLM, like it's on you to be presenting that different perspective. But I think like that's the honest conversation I need to have with myself. So if you're, I don't know, like, would love to hear if you have different thoughts on this, right? Because I think that the popular opinion right now is like, I don't know if it's the popular opinion. It's the one that I see a lot of online, right? I have to call out the bias that I see. I see basically more tenured people in the software development industry saying, like, stop using AI, it's making you stupid. Like, developers that are getting started don't know what they're doing. All they know how to do is copy paste. And I'm like, number one, I don't really believe that. Okay, like, I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration, at least a little bit. But number two, like, the new developers have this really powerful tool at their fingertips that we never had. So maybe it's just a matter of like having conversations around how to use these effectively for what our goals are. Right? For me, as someone with a lot more programming experience than someone just getting started, like, I can almost get away with copying and pasting code out of ChatGPT. I won't, but I can almost do it, because at least when I go to paste it, like, if I have a couple of seconds to glance through it, there's probably some stuff I can catch, or at least question, right, for the most part. Because if I don't get it, I am going to ask. But if you're brand new to this stuff, you might be saying, like, I don't even know what questions I should be asking. I don't understand anything I'm seeing here, but it gave me an answer, so I should just trust it. Right? I'm not saying that makes me better than other people or better than juniors. It's just that my experience pushes me in that direction to be able to question things, because that's what I've spent my entire career doing. And if you haven't built up some of that experience to go question stuff like that, then I don't blame people. But I think that this is a skill you want to build up, right? You want to be curious. You want to make sure you're taking time to understand. Should I go in this other lane? I can't see far enough ahead. We'll see what this person does, and then I'll make a decision. It's hard to see. There's 3 lanes. It kind of opens from 1 into 3. And most people that I'm behind are going to be in the far right lane. But it means that, like, this left lane is completely open. If anyone, like, I don't know, like 500 feet back wanted to turn left, they could just fly up past everyone. But then you have people that actually try to do this, and they're going to cause an accident. What are you doing, buddy? This is a good 360 cam time. So what I was trying to say is if you wanted to go up and turn left, so in the lane beside me, you could have. But then there was a Tesla that decides to do it, except instead of going up into the left lane, they just sat in between two lanes the entire way. And they're not turning left. So it was just really weird. So I couldn't then pull out to try and go around anything because they were kind of in the way. But this is what happens when you don't know how to drive a vehicle. Yeah, I think moral of the story here is like these like AI and the LLMs and whatever we're integrating them with, they're tools for us to use. And I realize some people seem to get triggered by this. I keep saying like AI is just tools. And no, it's way more than a tool. I'm like, I don't call it whatever the hell you want, man. Like, it's more than a tool. Sure, okay, it's more than a tool. You have the option to use it like a tool. It can help you like a tool. It can also hinder you like the wrong tool. So give it a different name if it makes you feel better. But my point is that regardless, you can have the same conversation about things that aren't AI. If you're misusing something because you're not understanding what your goal is or how to use that tool effectively, or whatever, not a tool, I don't know, then you might find that you're ineffective. I think that's what it comes down to, personally. So I'll wrap it up here because I'm just going to be sitting in traffic for the next couple minutes. So thanks for tuning in. I have another question from the comments that I'll get to on the drive home. I got the Dev Leader live stream tonight. So if you're watching this, it will already be after Monday. But the good thing about Mondays is they happen every week. So if you are interested, I do a live stream on my main YouTube channel at 7 p.m. Pacific, and so that's on Dev Leader. Usually what I will do is I will pick a topic from Commute. Generally it'll be the one that has the most either comments or the most views. Like basically it had the most engagement. I write a newsletter on that at weekly.devleader.ca. That way I can kind of polish some of my thoughts on it. And then generally I make my live stream, which goes out the following Monday. At 7 p.m. Pacific, like I said, and I kind of talk through that newsletter, but it's also an AMA. Okay, so if you enjoy these conversations, even though it's very one-sided because it's literally me talking at you, if you're like, hey, it would be fun to be able to ask questions and kind of have a discussion, join the live stream, because I will literally dedicate the entire live stream time just to asking questions in the chat. I would much rather do that. So, yeah, if you're interested, that's Mondays, 7 p.m. Pacific on my main channel, Dev Leader. And it's also streamed on like basically every platform. So like TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, Facebook. I don't know what I forgot. Twitch, Kick, it's there. So pick your favorite streaming platform, look for Dev Leader. If you're watching this on YouTube, I am making assumptions that probably like watching stuff on YouTube. So I hope to see you there. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.